It all started when I rented a ridiculously cheap house, but no one told me the previous owner had died inside, alone, sitting in a rocking chair. 3 weeks later, she started appearing in my dreams, and it wasn't a nightmare. She wanted me to fix something her own son had abandoned. At first, the house felt like a perfect escape from everything I wanted to leave behind, sitting isolated in the middle of overgrown land surrounded by tall, aging trees that seemed to swallow the sunlight as the day faded, creating long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls by late afternoon. And although the silence initially felt peaceful, almost therapeutic after the chaos of the city, it didn't take long for me to realize that it wasn't a normal kind of silence, because instead of feeling empty, it felt occupied, heavy in a way that pressed against your chest, as if something unseen was always present, quietly observing, filling the air with a tension that became impossible to ignore once night fell and every minor sound seemed amplified beyond reason, turning even the smallest creak into something that felt intentional. By the second week, the uneasiness began to take shape through patterns that were too consistent to dismiss, especially the sound of the wooden floor creaking in the hallway at the exact same spot every night, not randomly like an old house settling, but rhythmically, as if someone was pacing slowly back and forth barefoot, repeating the same path over and over again. And every time I stopped to listen more closely, holding my breath in complete silence, the sound would continue just long enough for me to question my sanity before abruptly stopping, creating the disturbing impression that whatever was causing it was aware of my attention, which forced me into a constant internal struggle between logic and instinct. Because while I tried to convince myself it was just structural noise or temperature changes, there was something deep inside me that knew it wasn't. The dreams started subtly, almost harmless at first, appearing as fragmented images that dissolved the moment I woke up. But there was always one recurring detail that refused to disappear. An elderly woman sitting in a rocking chair facing a window, her figure rigid and unmoving, her presence strangely oppressive despite the distance. And as the days passed, those fragments evolved into something far more vivid, something immersive, where I was no longer just witnessing the scene but existing within it, standing somewhere inside that same room as an invisible observer, able to hear the slow, repetitive creaking of the chair moving back and forth in a steady rhythm that never changed, never paused, creating a suffocating sense of anticipation that built with every passing second. By the third week, the dreams shifted from passive observation to direct interaction in a way that shattered any illusion of control I thought I had. Because in one of those nights, the chair suddenly stopped moving, breaking that endless rhythm in a way that felt violently unnatural, and for the first time the woman turned her head toward me, revealing eyes that were hollow yet fully aware, eyes that held no confusion or emptiness but a disturbing clarity that made it impossible to deny that she knew I was there. And when I tried to move, my body refused to respond, trapping me in place as if I had become part of the dream itself, forced to experience everything without the ability to escape, until her voice emerged, not from her mouth, but from everywhere around me at once. Low, stretched, unnatural, telling me that I needed to listen, that I needed to pay attention, that something in that house was wrong. Waking up didn't bring relief, because the fear followed me into reality with a physical intensity that felt just as real as the dream, leaving me sitting in bed, drenched in sweat, staring at the darkness with the overwhelming certainty that I wasn't alone, even though there was nothing visibly there, and that lingering presence stayed with me through the night, making it impossible to sleep again as I tried to rationalize what was happening, clinging to any explanation that didn't involve the possibility that something inside that house was reaching out to me. The situation escalated when the disturbances crossed into the physical world, starting with a loud, sudden noise in the living room while I was working, which led me to find a heavy book lying on the floor far from where it had been placed, positioned in a way that couldn't be explained by gravity or coincidence. And from that moment forward, These incidents became frequent, with objects shifting slightly out of place, dull impacts echoing from within the walls, as if something was knocking from the inside, and an ever-present sensation of being watched that didn't fade even during the day, slowly eroding any sense of safety I had left. The dreams became unbearable, transforming into something far more invasive and aggressive, where the woman was no longer distant, but increasingly closer each night, sometimes standing in the middle of the room, staring directly at me with an intensity that felt suffocating. Other times positioned just behind me, close enough that I could feel the cold stillness of her presence without even turning around, until one night she finally moved toward me, slowly and deliberately, raising her hands and gripping my face with a force that felt shockingly real, her skin freezing cold and unnaturally rigid, as if it didn't belong to something alive. And as I struggled to scream without any sound escaping, she spoke clearly for the first time, looking directly into my eyes and saying that it wasn't me, but that I could fix it. When I woke up, the pain on my face hadn't disappeared, lingering just enough to blur the line between dream and reality. And as I forced myself out of bed and turned on every light in the house, trying to regain control of the situation, I noticed something in the living room that made my stomach drop instantly. The rocking chair near the window moving gently back and forth in a slow, continuous motion, as if someone had just stood up from it seconds before I walked in. That was the moment I left without hesitation, driving aimlessly through the night until I found somewhere open, sitting there until sunrise while trying to process everything, but deep down already understanding that whatever was happening wasn't random and wasn't going to stop, because there was something in that house that demanded attention, something that refused to be ignored. And the more I tried to distance myself from it, the more persistent it became, leading me to the only conclusion I could no longer avoid, that I needed to find out the truth behind it. The next day, I started asking questions, carefully approaching locals under the pretense of curiosity, until I finally uncovered the truth about the woman from my dreams. And in that moment, every strange detail I had experienced began to align in a way that made it impossible to deny that what I was dealing with was not just in my head. What I learned from the locals wasn't deeply detailed, but it was enough to connect every piece of what I had been experiencing, revealing that the previous owner had lived alone in that house for years after her husband died, gradually isolating herself from everyone around her while maintaining a distant and strained relationship with her son, who eventually stopped visiting altogether, leaving her completely alone in a place that seemed to close in on her over time. And when the neighbors finally entered the house after days of silence and concern, they found her exactly as I had seen in my dreams, sitting in that same rocking chair, facing the window, as if she had been waiting for something that never came. Returning to the house after hearing that story felt different in a way I couldn't fully explain, because the fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a sense of purpose, as if I had stepped into something unfinished, something that had been waiting long before I arrived. And driven by that feeling, I searched through every part of the house until I found an old, forgotten box hidden deep inside a closet, filled with letters addressed to her son that had never been opened, each one carrying the weight of time, beginning with hopeful messages and simple attempts to reconnect, slowly shifting into frustration, loneliness, and eventually desperation as the handwriting deteriorated into something barely readable, revealing the emotional decay of someone who had spent too long waiting for a response that never came. The final letter stood apart from all the others, not because it was longer or clearer, but because of the raw intensity behind it, with fragmented sentences that spoke of abandonment, silence, and the unbearable passage of time, ending with a message pressed deeply into the paper that made it impossible to ignore, a declaration that she would never forgive him, leaving behind something unresolved that felt strong enough to linger even after death. That night, the dreams returned with overwhelming intensity, placing me once again inside the house, but now in a version that felt darker, heavier, almost decayed, where she stood closer than ever before, staring at me not with anger, but with an exhaustion so deep it felt suffocating, and without needing to say a word, I understood that what was keeping her there wasn't simply resentment, but something incomplete, something that needed acknowledgement before it could be released. With that realization, I called the owner and told him everything, and after a long silence filled with unspoken guilt, he admitted that he had avoided his mother for years, distancing himself from her until it was too late, and that when she died, he felt a mixture of relief and regret that never truly left him, agreeing to return to the house despite his hesitation, as if he knew there was no other way to face what had been left behind. When he finally arrived, the atmosphere inside the house shifted in a way that was immediate and undeniable, no longer oppressive but charged with tension, as if something was waiting for a resolution. And as he stepped into the living room and saw the rocking chair, he froze, overwhelmed by the weight of everything he had avoided. Before slowly picking up the letters and reading them one by one, his composure breaking with each passing word until, at the final letter, the silence in the house became absolute. Holding the paper tightly, he looked toward the empty chair and spoke words that seemed to carry years of regret, apologizing for leaving, for not coming back, for allowing her to wait alone for something that should have never been denied. And although his voice faltered, the sincerity behind it filled the room in a way that felt final. That night, everything stopped, the house falling into a silence that was no longer heavy or unnatural, but calm, empty in a way that finally felt right, as if whatever had been lingering there had been acknowledged and released, allowing me, for the first time since arriving, to sleep without dreams. A few days later, I left the house, not out of fear, but with the quiet understanding that whatever role I had played in that story had come to an end. And as I stood in the living room one last time, looking at the now motionless rocking chair, there was a brief moment where the air felt lighter, as if something that had been trapped for far too long had finally been set free. Even now, I've never experienced anything like it again, but sometimes, in moments of deep silence, I still think about the way she looked at me, and I can't help but wonder if what I witnessed was truly the end of her suffering, or simply the final echo of something that waited far too long to be heard.